Tony Kinnett.
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 Host of the Tony Kinnett Cast.
Let's get down to business.
You're listening to the Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WYPC.
WCYTV.
Here on the Daily Signal.
Good evening and welcome to the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal, live from Washington, D.C. It's good to be with you because we've got a lot of stuff to dig into and we don't even have the opportunity to start in the United States. We've got to back out and go somewhere else entirely. This being the hat of the United States of America, the Great White North, Canada, whom last night we found the election results going in a way that was rather expected. The Liberals did end up taking most of the seats in Parliament, but they do not have an outright majority. So allow me to explain. Canada doesn't have the bifurcated party system that the United States does. Canada has a couple of smaller, minor parties. And so what you end up getting after a victory like this one is the Liberals, who ended up, at least with most of the numbers pretty solid at this point, of a projected total of 169 seats, nice, in the Canadian Parliament. But an outright majority for Canada's 343 seats would require a total of 172. So Canada has to go to the Green Party or peel away members of its Conservative Party to vote with the Liberals for the outright majority. Now, I don't really think, given some of the far left parties in Canada, this is going to be difficult for Mark Carney to cobble together as the new prime minister. As the continuing prime minister, I should say, now that elections have cemented him in power. It's just going to be more liberal policy. And it's also going to be worse. So Canada has been under the liberal policies of Justin Trudeau for a long time, liberal policies for 10 years at this point. But you've got Carney coming in on the heels of an election called basically no confidence in Justin Trudeau. He was so low in the polls because of his authoritarian measures and his distaste for the issues that Canadians are facing, largely due to the policies of Justin Trudeau. He would cut energy, and then Canadians wouldn't be able to afford new business or infrastructure because they couldn't pay to keep it running. They couldn't pay to heat their houses because of climate change initiatives. They couldn't afford food. The safety and the crime problem in Canada is outrageous for a nation of that size because Canada refuses to allow Canadians to defend themselves, and then additionally allows extremely unfettered immigration into the country. So the Conservative Party gained a lot of oppositional momentum, especially through Pierre Poilievre, who is a very, very good leader for the Canadian Conservative movement. And it's been wild over the last couple of weeks, really, to see the opinion change, at least here in the United States, among a lot of people on the right, from liking Pierre Poilievre, thought he was a pretty decent, and again, not a red-blooded American kind of conservative, because he's not a red-blooded American kind of conservative, but he is in fact on the right. And he's definitely to the right of some of the comparisons I've seen, saying he's like Mitt Romney or something like this, which is completely stupid. The Poilievre movement was about returning a lot of things to Canada and making a truly Canada-first policy. And so then Trump in office started making a lot of jokes about Canada becoming the 51st state of the country. And he said it so many times that Canada and a lot of the public in Canada, so the government of Canada as well as the people who voted for said government in Canada, decided that Trump was no longer joking. And then you drop in the tariffs on top of that and have Trump saying things like, well, if you just become the 51st state, no tariffs, it doesn't play well with the Canadian people. Now, that all said, the Canadian people essentially turning the entire federal election into who's going to give a bigger middle finger to the United States is really hilarious. It's not wise policy. It's not really good policy in any way, shape, or form, but that's Canada for you. So Mark Carney comes out right after Trudeau smacked himself in the face with multiple batons. Carney comes out in front of the public and says, all right, guys, listen up. Here's the deal. I'm going to be super anti-Donald Trump, and you're never going to have Canada. We're going to fight for freedom, eh? We're going to get out there and give her our best shot there. Yeah. Sorry. And the Canadian people, again, seeing the first large middle finger to the United States, decided this was the guy to rally behind. Now, the problem is that Carney is a major international banker with a long history in the Bank of England and also through a lot of ESG, that's environmental social governance posts, opinions, policies. The dude's very, very, very far to the left. He is also super heavy on the climate change, which has consistently screwed over Canadians and everything else it touches. He's a very far to the left kind of candidate, which was surprising given how high Pierre Poilievre was, doing in the polls. Maybe a moderate candidate might have been better. But given the emotional tension of the Canadian people, which here's the secret to any democratic republic, here's the secret to any society that functions on a consumption-fed democracy. When you have a large-scale event that has a negative approach, the first person to come out that is a new voice and echo a common sentiment does very well. You actually saw this with Donald Trump, of all people, in 2015 and 16, when Trump came out to smack the Obama administration in a way that really hadn't been smacked before, which is willing to smack Republicans on the way to smacking Democrats. You got a lot of support behind Donald Trump because he was considered an outsider. Mark Carney stepping out of the mist to say that he was going to be the first one to fight Donald Trump when you had a lot of Canadian liberals either making fools out of themselves, like Ford, or you had individuals like Pierre Poilievre, who at the time didn't really know what to say because the Conservative Party of Canada had always been very pro-US. Carney coming forward brought a lot of momentum for himself. Additionally, Pierre Poilievre had a bit of a lag time in knowing what to do because if you have to, I think of people who run afoul of of any administration in power that they're on the same political party with. So, for example, let's picture just for a moment that I tweet something, throw out the old tweet, and then an individual that I support in politics immediately comes out and says, yeah, that Tony Kinnett guy, he's a stupid, dumb fool, and I don't like him anyway. And also, I don't like his taste in blazers. And why is he wearing a tie from 2007? What is this? It's ridiculous. I don't care for him. Well, for a lot of people, there would then be a trepidatious couple of weeks where you decide, what do you say? Because if the people who are following me, which largely agree with me politically, are looking for me to say things, they're also likely to be fans or in agreement with the individual above me. And you have to thread some needles. This is the really ugly part of politics, and it's why emotional-driven comms aren't always the best strategy, because you end up saying a lot of things that aren't true or end up embarrassing you later. What does this have to do with Carney and Poilievre and Trump and all the other? Poilievre had a couple of weeks. Again, Trump was a very ardent supporter of Poilievre. Conservatives in the United States, a lot of international pressure from the right was pushing for Poilievre against this liberal, wussy authoritarianism, the strangest practice oxymoron in the modern socialist hellscape that is, in fact, the Great White North. Poilievre didn't really know what to say because to be turned around and said, we're going to take your country from you, which is something that Trump jested about quite a bit, you can't really just bow down and say, yeah, that would be great for the Canadian people. You can't as a principle. You can't be a nationalist or a patriot of your country and then turn around and say, I'm going to sell my country to China. Usually you have to be dating someone from China to do that. But anyway, that's not particularly important. We'll leave certain members of the House of Representatives out of this conversation. So Poilievre finally came out very strongly against Donald Trump because he had to. He was required to. And now he basically has no one. And, I've heard the argument made, well, this is all Trump's fault. It's not. If you are an individual who is stupid enough to take what someone else outside of your country is saying about your country to be the main facet of what you look for in economic, security, crime, education, social governance, healthcare, and the other facets of public policy for the next terms of office, because it's easier for an incumbent to be reelected than it is to reshuffle something at the end of a term, well, then you do, in fact, kind of deserve what's coming to you. And part of this, by the way, comes from an abacus data, kind of a poll-closing opinion poll. Not really an exit poll, it's kind of an after the fact. but the most important factors to Canadians when deciding to vote. For individuals between 18 and 29, 30 to 44, and 45 to 59, reducing the cost of living was, for 18 to 29s, like 46, 47 points in this particular poll of their most important factor. Over 50% of people 30 to 44, that'd be your more solid millennials, said it was reducing the cost of living. And the kind of early millennials all the way into Gen X here, almost 50% said it was their most important factor. Then you get to dealing with Donald Trump. Now, people aged 18 to 29, only about 16% of them said that was their most important issue. Dealing with Donald Trump, 45 to 59-year-old Canadians, just shy of 35%. For the 60 and overs, the boomers in Canada, 50% of boomers in Canada suggested that dealing with Donald Trump of the United States was the most important factor in deciding to vote. Okay, what does this mean? Well, there's a bit of a problem in Western society in which age and stubbornness meet to create a rather difficult block of voting people. In the United States, the group that is the most disconnected with factual data when it comes to making informed decisions on voting are the elderly liberal population. These would be your, I've been walking around Washington, D.C. all this week. It's all of the old ladies out walking their dogs at 7 p.m. They'll have the exact same hairstyle, they'll wear the exact same glasses, and they're all talking about things that normal people just don't talk about. Because I've never summered anywhere before. I've, gone somewhere over the summer, usually to a lake. But it's not like the fancy rich person lake, and we need these environmental issues, is very, very important for the party. That kind of nonsense has in fact gripped an entire demographic. Now, Generation X, who no one ever talks about, is starting to, as they age, become more conservative, which is expected. Millennials are trending more conservative as they age, but there's more of a divide in the millennials. And then Generation Z is aggressively conservative, especially the lower or the younger half of Generation Z. That will backfire in Canada. And we'll talk a lot more about this in the next couple of weeks. Again, just right off the crack of the bat at the show, there is an international impact for who Canada chooses as prime minister, because immediately after the election results came in, here's Mark Carney telling everyone that climate change is going to be the deciding factor for Canada, so screw you to the Canucks.
You demanded action, and now it's time for the financial sector to deliver. To reach net zero, every country, every company, every bank, every investor, every pension fund around the world will need to make some big changes. In the run-up to COP26 in Glasgow, we have an enormous opportunity to bring climate change into the heart of every financial decision. And our plan will manage the risks from climate change while helping to seize the opportunities from a newer, greener economy. The UK has been at the forefront of innovation for centuries, brimming with ingenuity and a can-do spirit. It also houses the world's largest financial system. And by bringing them together, we can deliver the net zero world that you've demanded and that our future generations deserve. The world's coming to Glasgow. Let's reshape finance for a sustainable world.
That's a move. There you go. I sure hope that spiting Donald Trump was worth it. We'll be back in just a second. It's the Tony Kinnett Cast.
Good evening, everybody.
This is the Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WIBC.
Welcome back to the Tony Kinnett Cast here on The Daily Signal, nationally syndicated first on 93 WIBC, joined in person by Stephen Kent here in our lovely nation's capital. Hopefully not too many muggings and stabbings on your way into the city.
Nope, just a couple of protests that I had to get by over at Union Station. The libs are out again as usual, and we'll see whether or not they riot.
I'd really like to see some type of anti-protest action where the people dress up as the homeless outside of Union Station, a little skullduggery, little shenanigans here and there. I think it'd be a funny video.
It's fit for the theater kids of the Democratic Party.
And speaking of theater kids in the Democratic Party, or should I say, not at all speaking about the theater kids in the Democratic Party, you sent me an article that I wanted to dig in because normally we do Whatcha Watchin. We talk culture, we talk things that are worth watching, things that are absolutely not worth watching, but you can only watch something if you've got power. And the stinky Europeans in Spain and Portugal, they're not having too much luck with the watching and the power lately. Tell us about it.
Well, they're lovely people, Tony, to be clear. The Europeans are lovely people. A lot of my colleagues are based in Europe at the Consumer Choice Center, and a couple of them are in the dark in Spain and Portugal. No power in the entire country. I bet by the time this broadcast, it will be back up and running and people will have their lights back on. But this is a country that just went black out overnight, complete economy shut down, airlines and airliners that just are not going to be leaving the runways, people on the streets confused. And this is a country with 80% a renewable energy grid apart from the rest of Europe. It's a very interesting situation.
You described that like it was a plague from Exodus. I mean, like, it's just
that would mean that it's punishment from God, Tony.
Yeah, and this clearly isn't. And you're right, there are a lot of excellent crew over from the Consumer Choice Center in Europe. Of course, we've had on your colleague from Germany over on the show before. Mm-hmm. And I know that we've talked energy policy. We've talked about how the market drives some really great stuff forward. And often people, we could say with the best of intentions, we could say with perhaps some very misguided intentions, move an entire economy onto renewable energy in the pursuit of stopping climate change or whatever it is that they believe they're trying to accomplish. And it's a little tenuous maybe to put 80% of an entire country's energy on renewables.
Well, it always works until it doesn't. And at the Consumer Choice Center, the way that we, of course, look at this is that the first way that you should build your energy sector is around the best interests and needs of consumers, the people who are going to be turning on the lights, using the water, all that kind of stuff every single day. They approach energy from an ideological perspective. What is the ideal form of energy for X, Y, or Z moral purpose? Whereas you should be looking at it, what saves people the most money and allows them to have the things that they need. And so Europe has, of course, chosen the former of those things. They do not care much about the needs of consumers. And so you have a very, very tenuous energy grid. That is why Europe has been drawing so much of its power from Russia. And you get into this situation where when you turn off all of your nuclear power plants, when you are basically trying to build a green energy supply, you end up relying on countries like Russia in ways that are unhealthy for the geosecurity of all of your nations and the rest of the world.
There's an old kind of a joke that it does in fact involve a priest and a rabbi. Would you like to hear it? It is directly related to this.
Please, shoot.
So there's a priest and a rabbi, and they walk into a bar, and they're having kind of a rough day. And the priest goes up to the rabbi and is like, "Hey, Rabbi, it's good to see you." And the rabbi's like, "What's wrong?" And the priest says, "Well, we had a soup lunch at the church, and it didn't go very well." The rabbi's like, "Why?" And he said, "Well, I just gave a message, a sermon on why it was important to have something to remind you of the Lord at all times. And so we went to go sit down and eat soup, and I passed out a bunch of crucifixes to everyone to eat the soup with." And the rabbi said, "I don't know if you know this, but usually the shape of a cross doesn't really make it conducive for eating the soup." And he's like, "Yeah, but I mean, having the cross around at all times is like a really good thing." And so it's an older joke, and I'm really butchering the delivery of it, but it kind of fits the ideological pursuit of trying to achieve something. Yeah, nice little Star Wars reference there too. Don't ditch the spoon that works and is good for the consumer in order to go with the thing that may sound ideologically nice in the sermon illustration, but in effect.
And the Trump administration understands this. An energy independence agenda has been getting driven forward by this new administration in a way that is incredibly exciting. They are pursuing an age of American dominance in energy. And Pam Bondi has been directed by the Trump administration through executive order to stop using the power of the federal government to crack down on energy suppliers in our country. You probably saw over the past 4 years under the Biden administration an explosion in petty climate-based lawsuits by green, lawfare-oriented firms who are basically trying to destroy your Chevrons and your Exxons and your Duke Energies of the world. Yeah, and so they are suing energy companies across the United States for harm done to future generations. This was most recently seen in Carborough, North Carolina. It's a college town based right by Chapel Hill for UNC. And they're going after Duke Energy on the claims of future harm to future generations by a energy company that uses the largest amount of clean energy in North Carolina. And the Trump administration is getting the federal government out of participating in these kind of games.
And that's a good thing. One of the biggest surprises to me, and honestly comes from my own ignorance, that I didn't know a whole lot about Doug Burgum. When he announced his very short-lived run for the presidency, I didn't pay a whole lot of attention to this Dakota governor guy, but I will say that one of the things that has impressed me the most in the last 100 days is how, behind the scenes, the Secretary of the Interior has been putting in all of this time to removing regulations. Scott Zeldin as well, Lee Zeldin, has done phenomenal work with the EPA, making sure that we can make things as long-term, just for lack of a better term, easy for the consumer. Easy, inexpensive, and that way you don't have to worry about massive blackouts on a bubble gum and baling wire power grid that, again, may have really nice intentions, but is awful. It's kind of like an energy policy is incredibly important.
Yeah. And, there's a lot of things that we can learn from the failures in Europe and their inability to produce energy consistently for consumers across the continent. There's a wonderful piece out right now in Town Hall by a former Hungarian MP named Zoltan Kis, and he just points Americans to Europe and the EU as a fine example of what happens when you don't build an energy policy based around the needs of everyday people. Not only do you fail to produce like what we're seeing in Spain and Portugal, but you also put yourself in a horrible position of being reliant on sometimes unreliable partners such as Russia. And for the United States, we need to be dependent on nobody but ourselves. We have so much energy and raw material that we are sitting on top of that we could be pulling right out of the earth for the benefit of everyday people.
I think that also you run a risk of sacrificing the Gormans. If you don't have a great energy policy, you might have to relocate an entire planet worth of 800,000 people to, destroy the landscape for hard to find minerals. And of course, normally, my segues are really on point today. Normally,
the Trump administration would never do that.
No, absolutely. Normally we bring on Stephen for Whatcha Watchin, and we finally have some content to talk about that is excellent so far. I saw a little bit of it on the plane on the way into D.C., and it's the new Andor season has launched. Star Wars for adults with adult writing. Unfortunately, I guess later on in episode 3, it's maybe
a little extra adult.
Yeah, maybe a little more form over function in that particular sense. But right now, at least where I'm at, I'm just seeing some good writing again, like some really good stuff taking place on screen without pronouns and nonsense about Rose saying it's not about fighting, it's about saving the ones we love.
That was a beautiful line, and I resent you for mocking it, Tony.
I'm going to mock it even more.
We do have to save what we love more than we fight what we hate. She was right all along. But no, Andor season 2 is out. It is fantastic. This is prestige television for Star Wars fans, and it could be sold to you, I think, in one simple way. If you are a listener of the Tony Kinnett Cast or anything coming out of the Daily Signal, it is that the first episode of the show primarily focuses on a board meeting between imperial members of the hierarchy talking about an energy independence program for the empire. That enough sells me on watching this show.
Well, yeah, because you're a policy wonk. I'm going to sell it to you in the way that a goofball from Indiana would sell it. If you think about some of the best scenes in movies, it's where the villains are planning how they are going to royally muck everything up. And if you're looking at, these big, I don't know, you have like all the villains, they come together to attack the hero kind of episodes in TV series or in movies. They come in and they start talking through plans. And it's great because you get to see the little idiosyncrasies of the villains. And, you have one that's coming up with really stupid and crazy, insane ideas, and the other is coming up with, really devious and cruel ideas. And eventually they land on their master plan. And the first episode starts like that. I dig that. There's the masterwork of good villainy that has been lost in media, where everyone thinks that a villain has to either be pure and of evil, and it's just crazy, insane megalomaniac who's just walking over everything and painting his face on everything. And that's what the left thinks Nazism is, and recognizing the real insidious villainy is creative and it's subtle. And it involves a lot of detailed planning and the mechanisms of the entire government. I'm ready to see some good villainy again, and I finally saw just a hint of it before they went to a bunch of angry rebels yelling at each other in a crash, and I was excited to see something really cool for a few seconds.
Well, you definitely do get it out of this show, and I think another treat for fans of the politics of Star Wars, and just, you could just say the culture, is that we actually go to Mon Mothma's homeworld. So this is one of the Imperial,
where she throws a rave.
Yes, well, it's a wedding, and there's dance music at weddings. But Mon Mothma's homeworld of Chandrila, where she is a senator representing them in the Republic, we get the entirety of their marriage rituals on this planet. And there's also a very interesting message about her daughter being more socially conservative and traditionalist than Mon Mothma is. Mon Mothma represents the secularized, liberal Gen X mother who thinks that her daughter should not get married young and that she should live an individualistic life and discover herself. And her daughter is actually just full of conservative bones, wants to go through with the traditionalist marriage rituals of Chandrila.
Right, wants to be a wife and a mother and to be loved and be loved.
And resents her mother's unwillingness or inability to even pretend to support her in pursuing the traditions of their shared culture. And this arises first in season 1 and is now brought back up in season 2. And it's a wonderful example that we're seeing here in Washington, D.C. every single day of Gen Z, Zoomers, being slightly, or in many cases, a lot more conservative than their millennial peers, and certainly more conservative than their Gen X parents and family members. There is a conservative and traditionalist revival going on with people underneath the age of 20.
I see a thread and I got to pull it. So I think about this quite often. We talked a little bit ago with Wade Stotts about Gen Z's kind of one hallowed principle. And I know me talking about what I'm watching with someone other than you is perhaps.
I didn't know you saw other people.
I'm sorry. But we were talking with Wade, and the one sacred principle among the Gen Z is that nothing is sacred, and like everything is to be mocked. And we talked that through, and I said, well, there's got to be something that they do lean towards, that they are looking for in society, and I think that is really because they are seeing all of what they would say society used to be, people enjoying really long marriages, like really deep involvement in the community, raising a great family, that kind of stuff. And it's the millennials and the Gen X that came around and kind of mocked a lot of that the boomers and the earlier Gen X before them, before the younger Gen X and the millennials, I should say, that they enjoyed, that traditionalism. And they are looking for it. And so I think that a lot of the scorn is not just coming towards everything. It's coming towards the hyper individualistic, hey, just, go live your career and ignore marriage and family
do what makes
stuff.
You feel happy. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think even though they're not seeking it in perhaps the way that a millennial or a young Gen Xer would seek after something, they are seeking for it. And I think that's why you see a lot of the political shift. Sorry, that's that thread.
I think that thread is important, and for conservatives, who are still interested in Star Wars in the era of Disney. There's a lot going on in the Andor show that I think you can really get into. You can get sucked into really stupid Twitter debates about Star Wars these days. I highly recommend staying out of it, forming your own opinion, and watching Andor season 2.
We haven't even talked about what you're going to see tonight and what I wish I was going to see, which is I'm so thrilled to see Revenge of the Sith. It's back in theaters. One of the best cinematic openings ever to anything.
Already more popular than Snow White.
Oh yeah, a re-release of Star Wars Episode 3. Is everyone excited? I remember being in the theater when it first came out in 2005, which means I was in 5th grade. And I was pestering my dad constantly about things that were happening on the screen that had been in this like little cartoon beforehand.
He said, "Shut up, nerd."
Yeah, it's like, she's trying to watch the movie. And so I gotta say, I don't know how or where or when I'm going to see The Revenge of the Sith, but I am very excited for it.
Well, Tony, I have bad news for you. You really only have about 24 more hours before it's out of theaters, so it's time for you to take action. So I am seeing Episode 3 in theaters here tonight. I believe tonight and tomorrow are the last days of its re-release.
No.
You look horrified. This is a formative movie for people our age. If you are in your 30s, the first time I think you might have ever thought about politics deeply was 9/11. And then right after that, you might have started to think about it as America went to war in the Middle East. And then Star Wars Episode 3 comes along and crystallizes everything perfectly that we sort of perceived to be going on in 2005. And of course, you know, the media and Democrats are talking about how George Bush is a future dictator and he's not going to leave office. And Episode 3 is a perfect corollary for all that. And it's all completely ridiculous. None of that actually happens. But it is this moment where we think about, for the first time as young people, that American democracy is young, it is breakable, and there are ways in which we can slide into not even recognizing ourselves anymore, just like they did in Star Wars, just like the Republic becomes the Empire seamlessly.
I can't believe you just shoved Padme Amidala into American politics, and I kind of hate you for it. Stephen Kent from the Consumer Choice Center, Geeky Stoics as well. Thanks for coming in all the way today and doing a little Whatcha Watchin in person and energy policy of Spain and Portugal as well.
Stay safe in the swamp, Tony.
Always. We'll be back in just a second. Don't go anywhere. It's the Tony Kinnett Cast.
The Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WIPC.
Welcome back to the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal, nationally syndicated first from 93 WIBC. Taking a remote hit, sort of. We're live in Washington, D.C., so of course the most intelligent, brilliant thing to do is cut over to a guy who's also in D.C., like 4 blocks away. So this is going to be the best remote connection interview we've ever done. Andre Beliveau, Senior Manager of Energy Policy at the Commonwealth Foundation. I'm hearing 3 letters quite frequently, way too many times for my taste. They're LPO, and there's some big updates about it. I know we've talked about with Stephen Kent, some of the Portugal and Spain energy crisis going on right now. We've got something a little closer to home to talk about. So help us break this down.
Yeah, I think the crisis that we're seeing right now in Spain is actually, it helps make some of the arguments that I think a lot of us have been making for a while. We have a good case study of what not to do. So LPO, the Loan Program Office, is an office within the Department of Energy. And really what LPO is designed to do was to help fund clean energy projects that they believed otherwise, had the technological capabilities to work. It had a good, potential future, but just for whatever reason wasn't getting the private capital investment to move it along. So they created the LPO in order to help, subsidize it and move along. And one of the big recipients of this has of course been renewables like wind and solar, but also nuclear, which I think is an important part of this this conversation. So essentially, LPO helps fund these types of energy resources in order to make them move along in the process, as it were.
And it makes sense. I mean, the idea is that if someone's going to go out and start some type of natural gas power plant, they're going to start a coal power plant, then it's going to be some old-timey investor man, and he's going to come out and drop solid gold bars to build the coal power plant, right? I mean, every villain in a sports movie from like 65 to 95 had some evil oil tycoon from Texas that was going to shut this team down or something like that, right? And so they don't need the LPO. The idea is that
the wind energy company, man, they've got these legendary turbines, but they just don't have the raw capital from the man. So the LPO is supposed to come in and, give them a little bit of a push. And when someone with, an IQ above room temperature would say, oh, then this could help nuclear development as well, right? They'd say yes, but somehow all the money is still going to putting up windmills, which are ridiculously inefficient. I'm sure you could give us a big historical outline, but why is there just no accountability whatsoever when it comes to how this program is run right now, at least?
Right. Well, and that's sort of in my article that I wrote in Real Clear Energy. That's what I'm really advocating for is just it needs some serious review and reform. If it's going to exist, if we're not going to get rid of it, which I think would be like the arc libertarian answer is just to get rid of it.
Yeah, just get rid of it. Dump it off the side of the road.
I'm a conservative. I'm not a libertarian. And I also realize that energy policy isn't a pure free market, but we want it to be as pure a market as we can. But certainly if we're going to have an entity like LPO, if the government's going to use taxpayer dollars, it should be a good steward of taxpayer dollars.
I mean, you can make an argument as well, and I think that you have before, maybe not in the last article, but I know that you and others at the Commonwealth Foundation have articulated that there is an element of energy production, or at least how we invest as a country in energy that's involves national security and defense, right? Something that's China-proof or
That's right.
something easy to take down.
Absolutely. I mean, if it's going to exist, it needs to be a good steward of taxpayer dollars. It needs to engage in energy realism and not luxury beliefs.
A good steward, great terminology to frame that.
Yeah. So I mean, and that's really what I'm calling for. And it's true that LPO has been helpful in nuclear investments. To be sure, I don't think there's one nuclear project that's come off the ground. Not that there's been very many, but insofar as there has been in the last several decades, it's come from LPO. But that's good. Why is that good? Because nuclear is a reliable and secure energy source, and LPO helps make it more affordable. And there's a lot of reasons why nuclear is more expensive than it should be.
We've had Gabriella Hoffman on the show. And also I should give you a little background. I'm a former science teacher. And so I've talked about dispelling the myth of green goo in barrels, time and time again. So back to your idea of the accountability for the LPO, right? If we're going to look at the Department of Energy, we're going to look at, also how the EPA and the Department of the Interior interact with those as well. Mm-hmm. What are your big prescriptions? Because from the Beltway, again, since I'm here in this festering swamp at the moment,
from where we are sitting,
a very pretty day in this festering swamp, I hear a lot of platitudes. For example, the word accountability. You can even say good stewardship, although I think that's probably even a little bit more rubber to the road than is normally heard around here.
Sure.
I want to hear some active prescriptions that someone in Indiana or a listener that we have in Arkansas or Colorado or wherever, they can actually start calling for directly and have a measurement of whether or not what they wanted for got done.
Right. Yeah. I mean, are the programs that are coming out of LPR, are they supporting reliable energy? That's one. Is it actually going to keep the lights on and keep the grid humming? Is it going to be affordable? Because we everyday Americans need an abundant supply of reliable and affordable energy. So is this, in the long run, is this investment going to turn into the least cost option to keep the grid reliable? And then the last, as you mentioned before, is security. And indeed, national security is part of that, but also grid security. Because a lot of what you'll hear people who support sort of all of the above blank check to LPO is that, well, we need grid modifications and we need grid upgrades. Okay, but are they securing and firming a reliable grid? Or are these arbitrary things to bring more part-time energy onto the grid? So those are the kinds of calculations. What are the investments
nothing more permanent
going to?
than a temporary fix, don't you know?
That's right. So it should be investing things to actually secure reliable energy to help make it affordable, because at the end of the day, it needs to meet the real needs of American families and businesses. Again, not the luxury beliefs that some eco-fundamentalists or even some of the more reformed ones on the right might want to go after.
It's this issue of reliability that has a lot of people in the Midwest deeply invested in infrastructure in general, but we articulate it in a bit of a different way. So we have wonderful, beautiful roads that are more pothole than road. And it's an issue every single winter and summer that all of our roads are constantly under road construction. The freezing, the thawing, the heavy trucks on roads not rated for it, the recent development from the depths of hell known as the chip and seal method. It's not reliable how we currently do road maintenance. And, causing a major safety issue for road workers who have to work in less safe conditions to repair things more quickly. Infrastructure in the power, in the energy sector, is the same way. I'm seeing things as I watch kind of new developments, when I watch how energy policy is crafted, that appears to be just kind of flying from the hip, get it stapled up, kind of a baling wire and bubble gum, duct tape and urinal cakes to make a power grid. And it's embarrassingly unreliable. I feel like we're getting more power outages now than we had in the 70s.
Right. Well, and we have we find ourselves at a time where bad policy has crippled the grid, but also the bad policies that we had from the last 4 years are also coming at a time and where we find ourselves now of an increased demand for even more energy. So we're at this interesting crossroads, and I think President Trump has a great answer to this. He has certainly embraced energy realism. So has Secretary Chris Wright. They've sort of abandoned the all of the above approach, which is just really a blank check to net zero and green cronyism, and said, look, we need to have reliable, affordable, and secure energy. And I think when we're talking about LPO, if it's going to continue to exist, it needs to be reformed to make sure that it's aligned with energy realism. It's aligned with President Trump's policy for energy dominance. It's not this all of the above blank check for part-time and full-time energy. It's a clear benchmark. Are you going to provide reliable energy? Is this going to be affordable energy for everyday Americans? Okay, that seems like worthwhile investments. But if it's arbitrary investments just to bring more part-time energy onto a grid that should be operating full-time, that to me just does not make sense, and certainly doesn't align with, I think, President Trump's vision of energy dominance.
So, Andre, when we have discussions about kind of the congressional budget, how we start getting really sunny, soft, high in the sky, cloudy fairy tale ideas of bipartisanship that, if we just get enough Republicans and Democrats together and they sing Kumbaya and, something nonsensical, we all get them to agree that we're all going to work together to eliminate this national debt or reform this entitlement program. I think there's a better argument to be made on actual bipartisanship in the future over decent energy policy. And before everyone grabs their windmill-shaped pitchforks, give me a second here. Ezra Klein's book, Abundance. I actually heard the preview of what was coming in on this abundance thing when I was at an America Conservation Coalition kind of a summit in Utah. And there was a guy that came in from California, and he talked about the best possible way forward for climate activism and conservatism, two things that don't shake hands very often, is abundance. Because when energy is made in abundance, it is cleaner. When energy is made in abundance through options like nuclear, it is safer, it is cleaner, it is cheaper. And that is a better means for effecting social changes like lifting people out of poverty, which both the left and the right campaign on doing. I don't think that the move towards bipartisanship is done through the budget and we're all just friends when we're not on the floor kind of, leave it to Beaver, shucksy doodles kind of fake friendliness, but through competent energy policy that is centered in abundance. And I'm not trying to give Ezra Klein's got 1.5 billion problems in abundance. I was frustrated reading it, but that's one small kernel that I think he was pointed in the right direction.
Sure. Yeah. And I think when we talk about the abundance, some people like to talk about the abundance agenda. Well, what does that mean, though, exactly? It can't just be anything and everything, because that's not real abundance. That's not really going to bring about real prosperity. It has to be an abundance of reliable energy that's going to, again, so I really think the bipartisanship needs to be around reliable energy, because it's really hard to argue. Who wants to argue against having the grid be reliable? I've long advocated, and it's certainly our position at the Commonwealth Foundation, that we should have a grid reliability standard that says anything you do, any generation changes you make, has to maintain or improve reliability. And I think that's a fair standard, and let all sources compete. If you can compete towards a equal playing field of reliability, then let the best options go there and make out a least cost, most reliable energy grid. But some people, even some of our friends in the center right, who advocate for more responsible forms of conservation, or even advocating for the status quo at LPO, I don't see them embracing a reliability standard, and I'm not quite sure why. I know why the renewable industry won't embrace a reliability standard, because they know they can't meet those metrics right now. And my argument to that is,
because motion generative motors are
become more reliable, and then you'll be able to compete.
So I think this kind of boils down to gatekeeping, and I'm not going to try to get too into the weeds here, but I think this is a great point to wrap things up on. I'm frustrated in the center, that's kind of the corporate center, who has done all of this work and they know all of these terms and all of these corporate business sales and construction practices at the macro level, right? And when you start talking about reliability standards, it makes the field incredibly simplistic. And we are blessed to be in a time where you can explain most of this stuff to the average guy or gal who doesn't associate with this kind of thing during the day at all. This is something that I loved as a teacher. I called it the click moment. I believed, and I used to write about this back when I was in the classroom, that there is a growing trend of accessibility to the world so that the average person can make pretty competent decisions on medical policy, on energy policy, on economic policy, because no, it really is explainable. People are just using really big words to gatekeep others out of the conversation. This happens in academic circles and education all the time, right? Instead of saying how you teach something, we'll say pedagogy, and that keeps Janet out of the conversation. We're doing this with energy in the corporate sector and regulation. If you bring the public in using basic language that we use when speaking to each other, in making sure the energy bill is, or the energy sector, the energy development sector, more importantly, meets a reliability standard, it meets a cost effectiveness standard, and it meets kind of an industrious innovation standard, maybe as well. In you articulated that much better than I am here on the fly. I think that you've got an opportunity for an engaged population that has tangible impact immediately, because once the energy bills go down, every bill goes down.
That's right. And when you flip the light switch, you expect the lights to come on. And if it doesn't, you know there's a problem. You've beautifully described energy realism. And I think right now, we mentioned it at the beginning, we have a perfect case study of what happens when you do not have a reliability standard. What's going on in Spain right now, we had an example of that with the unfortunate event that happened in Texas under Hurricane Uri. And every grid operator in the country right now is raising the alarm about arbitrarily retiring baseload energy with an increase in demand. This is happening all in actual time. And I've been actually very happy to see just on Twitter in the last 24 hours, people understanding the realities of what happens when you build too much intermittency like wind and solar onto the grid. So I think this is, it's wonky stuff, but I think very quickly energy realism and the realities of the grid are becoming a kitchen table issue very quickly.
I think most things are becoming kitchen table issues, and that's exciting for me because it shows that we're leaving the lax, lazy era of post-Cold War behind. Instead of living off the fats and not having to care about anything, like the let them eat cake era, but from the people. Someone else will take care of it. Who cares? The energy will take care of itself. The economy will take care of itself. The education will take care of itself. The foreign policy will take care of itself. No, it won't. You have a responsibility as a citizen to be engaged. I have a responsibility as a pundit to make it palatable and digestible for you so that you can be the most effective that you can be. You guys over at the Commonwealth Foundation have a responsibility to do the research and break it down in a way so that legislators, that citizens can take this and make the most informed decision. I got to tell you, just as an aside here, whenever you find out kind of on the schedule for the day that you've got two issues of the same category, the same policy area, you get a little nervous. Oh man, the audience is going to fall asleep because we're talking about way too much energy policy or too much pro-life policy or too much education policy. And then you get into a conversation like this and you have a blast. And I guarantee you, if I looked at the live stream chat right now, people are thrilled because this kind of a future is inspiring. And it's not, fall asleep in the back of the classroom stuff. This is some tangible goodness.
That's right. And we have a great opportunity right now. It's one of the rare times we're actually seeing good policy coming out of Washington, D.C., particularly when it's energy policy, especially with what we had the last 4 years. So yeah, we not only need an engaged citizenry, everything you described is spot on, but we need our representatives in our state legislatures to start paying attention. If you want to monopolize on the moment right now to lower costs for families and actually have a reliable grid and a true strong energy future, there's not going to be a better moment than we have right now.
Andre Beliveau over from the Commonwealth Foundation. We'll make sure that we link your Real Clear Energy article in the description, as well as, of course, a link to the Commonwealth Foundation, who's one of the think tanks that we really do enjoy getting to dig through some of the stuff they bring to the table. Thanks again for hopping on with us, man.
Thanks so much for having me. Appreciate it.
We'll be back in just a second. Don't go anywhere. It's the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal, live from Washington, D.C.
This is the Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WIBC.
All right, now that we've talked energy policy, we've talked about culture, we've talked about Canada, now we can talk about some of the things happening right now that are really entertaining. These would be the Trump administration and kind of dealing with the economic issues of the time. You say, how is that, annoying? The markets are confused and I'm confused as well. I mean, I'll be honest with you, I'm a little bit confused at this point as well. It is in fact entertaining, and we'll get to that. And then number two, I got to talk a little bit about the White House Correspondents Association, because I didn't get a chance to talk about it over the weekend. And as an individual whose colleagues were removed from the White House press room because they write for a conservative organization, and I guess that means they can't ever cover the news or whatever. I do have a personal stake in watching through the election a lot of media entities lie and that get completely glossed over. Now all of a sudden, their careers are on life support and they just want us all to accept them back into public discourse. So, first of all, tariff things. So the Trump administration is still kind of going back and forth, settling a couple of deals between other countries. Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, has made several announcements regarding impending deals. And essentially what Scott Bessent is working towards are a series of trade deals in which the United States is continuing its free trade policy with expanded free trade with other countries, in which they try to reduce elements of tariffs they applied to U.S. goods, whether those are conditional or quota tariffs or whether those are across-the-board tariffs. Also, the Trump administration is trying to facilitate the growth of manufacturing back in the United States. Whenever Scott Bessent gets in front of the country and he says that's the goal of the tariffs, which is, again, a foreign policy lever to get a better deal for Americans, the economy surges and people are happy. Whenever Howard Lutnick or Peter Navarro get up in front of the press in the country and they start saying stupid things, like, if you make a foreign car in America, we're still going to tariff you. Right after it was announced that Honda and Hyundai and other foreign manufacturers like Toyota were going to make their new vehicles in the United States, especially in Indiana, which is always going to be a huge part of how I view things politically, being from the Midwest. Giving a middle finger to those who have just established business in the United States is a very bad and stupid move. And so it's very clear, first of all, I think that Bessent needs to be given a clear and present microphone and hand on the economic policy far more than he already has, including negotiating deals. Number two, Howard Lutnick and Peter Navarro need to be put on a boat and sent into the Arctic. A favorite line of mine is in Mission Impossible, after Tom Cruise does his little suspension thing down and he gets the stuff and the guy comes back into the security room where the things have been stolen, the knock list or whatever. The security guy drops his coffee on the ground. He's shocked. Oh no, it's been stolen. And then the director says, I want that guy in a radio tower in Alaska by the end of the day. Meaning like, I don't ever want to hear from this guy. No one needs to hear from this guy ever again. Yeah, that needs to happen with Howard Lutnick and Peter Navarro from the Trump administration. The reason that this is a problem is that right now, organizing a series of trade deals at the end of this 100-day section of the Trump administration and getting the economy moving forward with some slightly better trade deals will have major economic and political impact for the right, which is what the country needs to start considering because Trump's not going to be in office forever. And so what we need is to actually set the stage for long-term victory for the American people generationally. Part of that includes not having Gavin Newsom or AOC in the White House or a stilted, decrepit midterm in which Republicans underperform, or at this point, given that it's a midterm, Republicans perform as expected. So what do we do to fix that? Well, you actually let the deals move forward. You don't mess with things when they're being fixed, because again, the Democrats aren't focused on this at all. They're completely goofed. And it's not getting any better for them. This is really the key. You've got people like Chuck Schumer, who are looking at the immigration numbers which again, Americans are very happy with, and saying that he just doesn't believe them. He doesn't even believe the numbers. He doesn't believe the data at all. Check it out.
On border security, the White House and Republicans are touting the claim that illegal crossings are down by 95%, godways, as they call them, are down by 99%, and only 9 close to foreign nationals were released into the country compared to many more under the Biden administration during the equal period. Is that not a sign that the Republicans...
I'd say one thing to you. I don't trust Trump's numbers.
And this is all over the country. This is, you have Democrats all over the country who are responding to what was a tenuous time for the Trump administration by missing the opportunity in front of them and going after something completely different on things that Americans are 80-20 on in favor of the Trump administration. And that brings us, last but not least, to the White House Correspondents Association, who had their little dinner over the weekend. And I did truly enjoy this. I enjoyed it for a couple of reasons. Number one, I love it when we actually get to see the guy who is in charge of the White House Correspondents Association, who has to be the most embarrassing caricature of any person ever.
We journalists are a lot of things. We are competitive and pushy. We are impatient, and sometimes we think we know everything. But we're also human. We miss our families and significant life moments in service to this job. We care deeply about accuracy and take seriously the heavy responsibility of being stewards of the public's trust. What we are not is the opposition. What we are not is the enemy of the people, and what we are not is the enemy of the state.
And that brings us over to Alex Thompson, the national political correspondent for Axios. So he gets up in front of the Correspondents Association in their little dinner where all journalists are busy, kissing each other, and says, well, President Biden's decline and its cover-up by the people around him, it's a reminder that every White House, just the preening, check it out.
One serious note, to my bones, I believe that reporting and the White House Correspondents Association is as necessary as ever. President Biden's decline and its cover-up by the people around him is a reminder that every White House, regardless of party, is capable of deception. But being truth tellers also means telling the truth about ourselves. We, myself included, missed a lot of this story. And some people trust us less because of it. We bear some responsibility for faith in the media being at such lows. I say this because acknowledging errors builds trust, and being defensive about them further erodes it. We should have done better. I believe our mission is vital in a world where people are struggling to figure out what's true, and people with power are not telling the truth.
Hilariously, Chuck Todd has also tried to jump in and slam Thompson and a lot of the other left media, who is now kind of trying to come in and say, guys, we're really sorry that we lied to you overtly and openly and, rated you super duper false for saying that Biden might have seriously aggressive dementia, despite the obvious evidence.
This is not a media failure. This is a failure of the Democratic Party. And I just sort of the virtue signaling that some people have done to try to say that the media missed this story. They didn't miss this story. No. David Ignatius wrote, I just refuse to accept this stupid premise because it's a manufactured right-wing premise in order to stain the media. The media's got plenty of things to attack them for, and there are MSNBC and CNN and pundits that absolutely carried water for Joe Biden, but they're not journalists. They're former strategists that carried water for Joe Biden. The journalist, David Ignatius, wrote a very high-profile column in October of 23 saying, is he really running again? This doesn't seem like a good idea. People like me were promoting Dean Phillips's campaign because he was running
Wall Street Journal did a bunch of coverage.
So it's not like this. This isn't WMDs, where the White House worked with the mainstream media to manufacture a story that did not exist. That was a press failure, massive press failure. This was not that failure. This is an attempt by some to virtue signal, and it's this horrible sort of pitting different news organizations against each other, when ultimately the people at fault are Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, Jill Biden, Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, every elected member of Congress.
So there you have it. You have an administration who is coming up at the end of this 100-day celebration, talking about illegal immigration policy. More quietly in the background, you have economic issues starting to be resolved. Again, if Lutnick and Navarro can keep their mouths shut. And most importantly, what we're looking at is an administration who's going to start tackling the issue of activist judges operating outside of their jurisdiction by setting up cases for the Supreme Court, so that at the end of this administration, we are going to know one way or the other who can do what, where, when, why, and how. On the flip side, you have individuals on the left losing their ever-loving mind, again, not over things that would actually drive them political capital, but you have people like Ilhan Omar strutting forward to announce that, you know what we really need? We need to stand behind illegal immigrants all the time, and you got to protect them because it's just like the Holocaust. Here you go.
If they thought the first 100 days of chaos would break us, they were wrong. Because across this country, millions of us are standing up for our human rights and our democracy. Judges are fighting back to block these unconstitutional executive orders. Here in Congress, we are fighting back every single day. We are fighting to protect immigrant families from mass detention and deportation. We are fighting to prevent horrific cuts to Medicaid, SNAP, and Social Security. It won't be easy, but we must continue to organize, to speak out, and to build a future that reflects our highest ideals.
At the end of the day, the story of the Maury is that we are in for another heaping helping of nonsense. But the bright side of that heaping helping of nonsense is it is a baked into the cake kind of nonsense for Americans. And that means that we are going to see some stabilization coming down the line and some deliveries on promises, again, regarding things we talked about during the show, like energy policy, which is going to have decades of impact. And that is worth far more than Congress who's quibbling and squabbling over this, that, and the other, or whether we're making, analyses on international situations of, Mark Carney being exactly what Canada deserves. We'll be back tomorrow with a little bit more. This is the Tony Kinnett Cast here in Washington, D.C. from the Daily Signal. Take care.